One key takeaway for me is the impact that climate stress and climate change has on the communities, especially communities that are already in conflicts. I think it is important for us to think about how they're affected by how they're dispossessed because of climate stress, the potential for conflicts to emerge out of those borderlands, and then the potential for the extent at which natural resources contribute to their livelihoods. For me, one key takeaway is that we need to study and think more around the alternatives to survive. I mean, we're talking about managing our natural resources and our ecosystem. But again, it's the same ecosystem that these communities rely on. What is the right balance between utilizing our natural environment and protecting our natural environment? So I think it's an area that needs further study and we should look into properly. I think one major finding from our research that relates to the theme of this topic is one, I think communities like South Sudan or communities that have been in conflict for a very long period of time are stressed, highly stressed, and they are forced to rely on their natural environment to survive. So the key takeaway from my research is that we need to be cognizant of these dynamics, of the pressures that these communities go through, and not simply overlook them. Another key takeaway is that these communities are finding ways to resist. They have historically manipulated and used the environment in a good way, and they are conscious about the danger and the damages that they could cause to the environment. So they are conscious of these dynamics. We need to recognize their ability to resist and adapt in those situations. However, we need to also find ways of how we can support them to whether better utilize the environment or with more information that helps them navigate the challenges better. I think one key takeaway for me is when we are talking about community and representation, it's one lesson that I've learned from this workshop. What do we mean by community first and foremost? Who is the community? When we say representation, how are they actually being represented? Usually theoretically we talk about representation. We theoretically recognize the need for communities to be represented, but usually in practice it's not the case. So for me, one key takeaway is we need to be conscious about what we mean when we say representation. Representation needs to start from the very start of a process. We need to ensure that the communities are not subjects when we're talking about them being represented, but rather they should be part of the process from the start to the end of whatever engagement. If it is a community development project, these communities need to be engaged from the start. We should not talk about their representation. They should be part of the conversations that even talk about their representation. So I think it's critical when we say representation and communities, what do they really mean? I think what is needed to better understand instability in East Africa is we need to respect local knowledge and local understanding of contexts. Many times I've seen it's usually the practice that we don't necessarily rely on local knowledge, or we assume that local actors may not understand the conflict dynamics as much. So we need to start giving them more precedence to understand the issues. And even when we're doing research, we need to adapt research methodologies that are not simply extractive, but rather research methodologies that actually empower the actors that we're engaging with to engage in research. Empowerment can be in various forms. One, when we are engaging with local researchers, for example, we need to do it in such a way that it helps them understand their own environment and their own conflict dynamics as well. We also need to give them the space and platform to articulate their issues. I've always thought it's not fair for external actors to represent the views and concerns of a community. It would make more sense and give it more legitimacy and voice when those communities are empowered to speak out on their own issues. I think they understand the dynamics better. We should empower them then better. We should empower them to be able to articulate and express their concerns and issues well. So I think that is what is really needed. My key take home is on the meaning of borderlands. What do we mean by borderlands? When we are talking about communities, borderlands and their gender dynamics, what does that really mean? one key takeaway that someone highlighted during the workshop is when we're talking about the gender dynamics of communities at the borderlands, what do they think about their own gender? Not us relying on our ideas and ideologies about what the gender dynamics should be, but what do they think about their own gender dynamics and communities? Another key takeaway for me is the point on representation. When we are saying representation, what do we mean? We should try and engage communities throughout an entire process rather than engaging them as subjects to our conversations, as subjects to our projects or whatever we want to do. So representation needs to start from the word go, and communities need to be part of the conversations about their own projects. They should not be subjects to our projects.